Hello, dear listener. It's time to leave the volume of the world behind. Let the rush hour traffic fade. Let the endless chime of notifications fall silent. Take a deep, slow breath, in through your nose and out through your mouth. With every exhale, release one layer of tension, one unwanted thought. You are safe here. You are quiet here. We are going to meet Elias. Elias lived in a city that never slept, never even truly dimmed its lights, Veridia. For years, Elias was a willing participant in the city's relentless rhythm. His life was measured in deadlines, coffee cups, and the sterile hum of server rooms. He was a successful architect, designing structures that scraped the sky, beautiful, cold monoliths of glass and steel. But lately, Veridia had become less a home and more a vast, echoing cage. The noise was constant, the grinding of the subway beneath his apartment, the perpetual sirens, the aggregated stress of 8 million simultaneous conversations. His sleep was fractured, his mind a constant, buzzing whiteboard of must-dos. The turning point came on a Tuesday, late afternoon. Elias was sitting in his high-rise office, the city spread out below him like a glittering, overwhelming circuit board. He was staring at a blueprint, a design for a new, even taller residential tower. The task felt meaningless, an endless iteration of the same concrete ambition. A sudden, sharp headache pulsed behind his eyes. He slowly pushed his chair back from the desk. He didn't make a grand gesture. He simply typed an email, a short, polite, yet definitive resignation, and sent it. No 2 weeks' notice, no detailed explanation, just a clean break. Then, he walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. Outside, a soft, persistent rain had begun to fall. It wasn't the violent downpour of a storm. It was a gentle, almost musical rain, the kind that dampens sound and cleanses the air. As he watched the raindrops trace silver paths down the glass, a single, calm thought surfaced from the chaos of his mind. I need to go where the only sound is the rain. That evening, Elias did what he hadn't done in years. He went home and simply sat. He didn't check his phone. He didn't turn on the TV. He just listened to the muffled, soothing sound of the city rain outside his window. He realized he didn't need a destination. He needed an absence of noise. His solution arrived 3 days later, in the form of a faded, hand-drawn map tucked inside an old family photo album. It was a map of a remote, forested area in the Pacific Northwest, a place his grandfather had briefly owned. Marked clearly on the map, next to a meandering river and surrounded by tall, silent fir trees, was a small X labeled the Quiet Hour Cabin. It was a place he'd forgotten even existed, an accidental sanctuary. The journey was a blur of highway miles that gradually stripped away the layers of urban density. The concrete gave way to asphalt, the billboards to forest. As he drove, the air grew cooler, cleaner, and filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. When his GPS finally failed, a relief, not a frustration, he knew he was close. He followed the hand-drawn path down a gravel track, the stones crunching softly beneath his tires, a sound that felt oddly intimate and real. The gravel path led him to a small clearing, and there it was, the Quiet Hour Cabin. It wasn't picturesque in the magazine sense. It was sturdy, built from dark, rough-hewn cedar logs, small, and nestled so deeply into the surrounding forest that it felt like an intentional secret. The windows were dusty, and the porch sagged slightly, but it looked utterly, perfectly still. The most noticeable thing, however, was the silence. It was a physical presence, not an empty silence, but a rich, deep, quiet, punctuated only by the subtle, natural sounds of the forest, the gentle drip, drip, drip of water from the eaves, the distant, lazy caw of a single crow. Elias stepped out of his car. The air was cool and smelled of ancient wood and moss. He inhaled deeply, letting the clean, forest scent fill his lungs. For the first time in months, his shoulders dropped. He opened the cabin door. It let out a long, protesting creak, the only jarring sound in the clearing. Inside, the light was soft and golden, filtered through the small, dusty windows. The cabin consisted of a single room, a simple stone fireplace, a small kitchen counter, and a narrow cot covered with a thick, quilted blanket. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust, yet felt instantly welcoming. He walked over to the cot. He ran his hand over the worn, soft quilt. It smelled faintly of his grandfather's pipe tobacco and wood smoke, a smell of deep, forgotten comfort. Elias began the simple ritual of settling in. He unpacked his few bags, a stack of paperbacks, no screens, a warm sweater, and a thermos. The first task was to build a fire. He found a small stash of dry kindling near the hearth. He knelt, feeling the coolness of the stone floor through his jeans. He arranged the wood meticulously, stacking the larger logs like a tiny, sturdy pyramid. With a deep breath, he struck a match. The small, brilliant flare of the match was the brightest light in the room. He held it steady beneath the tinder, watching the thin wood catch the flame. It started small, a nervous lick of orange. Then, with a gentle crackle, the fire grew stronger, casting warm, dancing shadows on the cedar walls. The sound of the fire was the most beautiful sound Elias had heard all week, a rhythmic, soft sizzle and pop. It was a natural sound, one that comforted the primal part of his brain. He stood up and walked to the nearest window. He wiped away the dust with the cuff of his sweater, creating a small, clear viewing port. Outside, the forest was deepening into twilight. The rain had intensified slightly, settling into a steady, mesmerizing hush. Look closely with Elias through the small window pane. See the rain falling straight down, silver threads against the dark green of the trees. Notice how the moss on the nearest rock is an impossibly vibrant emerald, shining wetly in the fading light. Hear the consistent, soft tapping of the raindrops against the cabin's cedar roof. Tap, tap, tap. Elias smiled. This was it. No notifications, no sirens, no deadlines, just the fire's crackle and the rain's hush. He pulled the thick, comforting quilt from the cot and wrapped it around his shoulders. He walked to the fireplace and sat on the wooden floor, leaning against the cool stone. He watched the fire breathe, inhaling the light, earthy scent of the burning wood. His whole body started to slow down. His heartbeat, which had been racing for years, began to synchronize with the soft, steady rhythm of the fire. Breathe in the warmth, breathe out the chaos. The last thing Elias did was look up at the dark wooden ceiling. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in memory, he felt the heavy, welcome weight of true stillness. Welcome back, dear listener. Settle deeper into your comfort. Feel the warmth of the fire on your skin and the cool kiss of the forest air on your face. Elias is asleep now, and we join him in the deepest part of the quiet hour. Elias woke up slowly, not to an alarm, not to the blare of traffic, but to the softest, most gradual shift in the light filtering through the cabin window. For a moment, he was utterly disoriented. His body felt heavy and rested, a foreign sensation after years of poor sleep. He didn't know the time, and for the first time in memory, he didn't care. He opened his eyes. The small cabin was bathed in a silver-gray light. The fire from the night before had collapsed into a bed of deep, glowing embers that pulsed with soft heat. He was still wrapped in the heavy, comforting quilt. He could feel the cool air on his face contrasting with the gentle warmth trapped beneath the blanket. He listened. The silence was still profound, but now it was a slightly different quality of quiet. The rain had stopped. The only sounds were those of awakening nature. A soft, steady drip from the eaves onto the mossy ground. The dry, delicate scratch of a squirrel foraging outside. The distant, rushing sound of the river, amplified by the still air. This silence was not empty. It was full. It was the sound of everything being exactly where it should be. Elias slowly pushed the quilt aside and sat up. He felt a deep, almost physical cleansing in his mind. The buzzing, frantic whiteboard of must-dos was completely blank. His first conscious thought was simple and pure: tea. The cabin's small kitchen was primitive but functional. He found an old, dented kettle and filled it with water from a tap that drew straight from a local spring. The water was icy cold and tasted impossibly clean. He raked the embers in the fireplace, fed them some small pieces of kindling, and soon the fire was crackling with renewed life. He set the kettle over the flames. While the water heated, he walked to the window. The forest was stunning. Ancient, towering fir trees rose straight up into the pale morning sky, their needles a dark, rich green. The ground was a tapestry of ferns, deep red earth, and vibrant green moss. The kettle began to whistle, not a harsh, alarming shriek like a city kettle, but a gentle, steady, hissing hum that signaled readiness. Elias prepared his tea, choosing a simple chamomile blend. The scent was sweet and calming, a perfect counterpoint to the pine scent of the cabin. He carried the warm mug to the front porch. He sat on the slightly sagging wooden step, pulling the quilt around him again. And then he simply watched the morning breathe. The air was crisp and cool. A low, thin mist was weaving through the trees, slowly dissolving as the light grew stronger. The mist moved with a deliberate slowness, making the forest appear to be exhaling. Elias took a deep sip of tea. The heat spread down his throat, warming him from the inside out. He felt no urge to check his phone, which remained powered off in his bag. No compulsion to rush, to plan, or to worry. He allowed his focus to narrow until the only things that existed were the warmth of the mug in his hands, the gentle rhythm of his own breathing, the slow dance of the mist. This was the quiet hour, stretched into a morning. His body, now fully rested, signaled that it was time for movement, not frantic exercise, but deliberate, peaceful motion. Elias decided to explore the immediate area and find the river he heard. He dressed in warm, comfortable clothes and stepped off the porch. The ground beneath his feet was soft, damp earth, covered in a springy layer of pine needles. He followed the sound of the water, walking slowly, mindfully. Every step was deliberate. He noted the intricate patterns of the moss on a fallen log, the way the bark of the cedar trees spiraled. After a short, peaceful walk, he reached the riverbank. The whispering river was not wide or aggressive. It was shallow, clear, and moved at an unhurried pace, flowing over smooth, light-colored stones. The sound it made was not a roar, but a constant, low murmur, a steady, hypnotic drone that vibrated with natural energy. Elias sat down on a large, flat river stone. He closed his eyes and let the sound wash over him. The river's song was a perfect example of natural white noise. It was a sound complex enough to occupy the mind, yet rhythmic enough to lull it into deep calm. It drowned out any residual echoes of the city's chaos. He dipped his hand into the water. It was startlingly cold, but clean. The clarity of the water matched the clarity of his mind. He sat there for a long time, simply observing the water flow past the stone. Every small ripple, every tiny movement of sand was a slow-motion drama. He watched a single, dry leaf get caught in the current, spin gently, and then continue on its journey. He realized the river wasn't rushing to a destination. It was simply being. It was the antithesis of the city. As the sun climbed higher, casting dappled light through the dense canopy, Elias felt a profound gratitude for this accidental sanctuary. The cabin was a physical space, but the quiet hour was a state of mind, a place where time was measured not in hours or minutes, but in breaths and heartbeats. He stood up, his joints loose, his muscles relaxed. He was ready to face the day, not with dread, but with serene purpose. His only task for the day was to collect more firewood, perhaps read a few pages of his book, and then sit by the fire again as the forest prepared for the evening. He was finally at home in the silence. Welcome back, dear listener. As Elias settles deeper into the rhythm of the forest, so do we. Let your breath become as soft as the moss on the forest floor, and your mind as clear as the spring water. We are moving into a space where silence isn't just an absence of sound, but a language all its own. The days that followed Elias's arrival at the Quiet Hour cabin blended into a seamless tapestry of simplicity and profound peace. The rigid structure of city life, once an unyielding cage, now felt like a distant, irrelevant memory. Time here wasn't segmented into hours or meetings, but into the natural cycles of light and dark, warmth and cool. He spent his mornings by the whispering river, not just listening to its murmur, but starting to understand it. He learned that the river's sound changed subtly, with the weather a little softer on misty days, a touch more insistent before a rain shower. It became a living, breathing clock for him. His daily rituals were elemental. He would wake with the first hint of silver light, rekindle the embers in the fireplace, and brew his tea. After a simple breakfast of dried fruits and oatmeal, he would head out into the forest. His initial forays into the woods were hesitant, cautious steps of an urban dweller. But with each passing day, his confidence grew. He wasn't just walking through the forest, he was walking with it. He learned to identify the distinct calls of various birds, the territorial caw of the crow, the quick, bright chirp of a robin, and the soft, almost shy hoot of an owl he sometimes heard even during the day, hidden deep in the shadows. One afternoon, while gathering firewood, Elias stumbled upon an ancient, gnarled cedar tree. It was immense, its trunk wider than his outstretched arms, its bark a rich, reddish-brown, deeply grooved with age. Its lowest branches, thick as other trees, swept down to touch the forest floor, creating a natural, shaded alcove. He felt an immediate, inexplicable pull towards it. It exuded an aura of profound wisdom and quiet strength. He sat down at its base, leaning his back against the rough, cool bark. The air within the alcove was still and smelled intensely of cedar and damp earth. He closed his eyes, and for the first time, he felt a deeper connection to the forest than just observation. It was as if the tree itself was breathing, its slow, deep rhythm mirroring his own. He imagined the vast network of roots beneath him, stretching far and wide, connecting this giant to countless other trees, sharing nutrients, water, and perhaps even silent communication. This tree became his thinking tree. He would return to it often, not to actively think or plan, but simply to be, to allow his mind to quiet down completely and to absorb the tree's ancient stillness. It was during these times that he felt the remnants of Veridia's stress finally dissolve, leaving behind a clear, open space within him. As the days turned into weeks, Elias discovered something even more remarkable about the forest: its subtle, almost imperceptible lights. Not the artificial glow of city lights, but delicate, natural illuminations. He noticed tiny, phosphorescent mushrooms that glowed with a soft, ethereal blue light deep within shaded crevices. These were only visible in the deepest twilight, shimmering like scattered jewels. He also found patches of bioluminescent moss, similar to the description in Elias' story, but unique to this part of the forest. These patches, hidden beneath fallen leaves, would emit a gentle, cool green light after a particularly damp day. They weren't bright enough to guide his way, but rather to reveal the hidden magic of the forest floor, a soft, pulsating heartbeat in the dark. These natural lights weren't just beautiful. They were a secret language the forest whispered to those who listened closely. They spoke of cycles, of hidden life, and of a world vibrant and alive even in the deepest shadows. Elias began to keep a simple journal again, not of deadlines, but of observations. He called it his Forest Chronicle. Entry 1. The river sang a lullaby today, soft and endless. No two pebbles sound the same as the water passes over them. Entry 2. Found a patch of glowing moss near the old cedar, a secret forest heartbeat. It felt like the earth was breathing out tiny stars. Entry 3. The silence here isn't empty. It's full of tiny sounds that the city drowned out. The rustle of a single leaf, the hum of a bee, the drip of dew from a branch. Each sound is a tiny, perfect note in a grand symphony. He was learning to see without his eyes, to hear without effort, and to feel with an open heart. He was rediscovering senses that had been dulled by years of urban overstimulation. His architecture background, once a source of stress, now found new expression. He wasn't designing buildings for humans, but observing the perfect, organic architecture of the forest itself. The way a branch curved, the resilient strength of a spider web, the fractal patterns in a fern. He realized that true design was found in nature's effortless efficiency. One evening, as the last light faded, Elias was sitting by his fire, the cabin filled with the comforting smell of wood smoke. He was not reading, not writing, just being. The glowing embers cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. He felt a deep sense of contentment, a peace that was both exhilarating and profoundly calming. The city, with its demands and its noise, had receded so far that it felt like a dream from another life. He thought of the phrase, "Home is where the heart is." For so long, his heart had been lost in the clamor. Now, sitting in a simple cabin, surrounded by the deep, resonant silence of the ancient forest, he knew he had found it again. The only sound now was the gentle crackle of the fire, a steady, warm heartbeat in the heart of the wilderness. Listen to that sound, dear listener. Let it wrap around you like the softest blanket. Feel the warmth spread from your chest to your fingertips, to your toes. You are safe. You are warm. You are at peace. Drift now into the quiet, into the calm. The fire is low, the cabin is warm, and Elias is enveloped in the stillness of the deep woods. Take a breath and let your awareness rise, moving past the trees, past the clouds, toward the infinite, silent sky. The days Elias spent in the cabin had been dominated by the soft, filtering light of the forest canopy, often shrouded in a gentle, calming mist. But one evening, as the sun dipped behind the western ridges, the wind shifted, carrying the clouds away and leaving behind a sky of impossible clarity. Elias noticed the change immediately. After lighting his evening fire, he stepped out onto the porch. The air was crisp and bitingly cold, yet clean. He looked up and gasped. Above him, stretching from horizon to horizon, was a sight the city had robbed him of for decades: the Milky Way. It wasn't just a scattering of stars, it was a river of silver light, dense with millions upon millions of distant suns. The stars were so numerous, so bright, that they seemed to cast their own faint light on the clearing. It was an overwhelming display of cosmic silence. He quickly retrieved his thickest quilt and a simple wooden stool. He carried them to a small, open spot near the thinking tree, away from the cabin's own small light. He spread the quilt on the cool earth and lay down on his back, pulling the heavy fabric up to his chin. Lying there, looking up into the abyss, Elias felt an entirely new form of stillness. The forest's silence had been grounding, connecting him to the earth. This silence, the cosmic silence, was expansive, connecting him to eternity. His scale immediately shifted. The pressures of his old life, the deadlines, the clients, the traffic shrank to the size of a single, insignificant grain of dust in this vast, quiet space. He realized that the city's chaos was entirely local and man-made. It had no place in the grand, serene order of the universe. He stayed there for hours, his gaze sweeping across the constellations. He found comfort in the predictable, slow rotation of the stars, their light having traveled millions of years to reach his solitary eye. Each twinkling point was a whisper of time, of patience, of immense, silent power. The cold air kept him alert, but the quilt kept him warm and snug, creating a perfect sensory balance. Cool air, warm body, quiet mind. As the night deepened, Elias went back inside, his mind wide open. He sat by the fire, mesmerized by the glowing wood. His eyes fell on a small, dusty box, tucked away on a shelf. It was an old transistor radio. Curiosity prompted him. He flipped the power switch. At first, there was only static, the harsh, angry white noise of interference. He slowly turned the dial, sweeping through the frequencies. The static occasionally gave way to faint, garbled talk shows, the ghosts of nearby towns. He quickly turned past them, not wanting the noise to shatter the peace he had found. Then, Just as he was about to switch it off, he hit a low, clear frequency. What he heard was not news or advertisements, but a piece of classical music, a slow, deeply moving piano sonata. It was being broadcast from a distant, small-town station, the signal just strong enough to cut through the mountain air. The music was beautiful, a measured, tranquil melody that spoke of longing and peace. It was a perfect, gentle reminder that the world contained beauty and stillness, not just frantic noise. He listened until the song ended, and the broadcast faded back into a soft, benevolent hiss. He realized the quiet hour didn't require the absence of the world, but the selective presence of its peaceful elements. This realization prompted a final, symbolic act. Elias went to his backpack and pulled out an old, worn leather notebook, his last personal relic from Veridia. It wasn't his work blueprint, but a journal filled with frantic to-do lists, ambitious and stressful, goals, and sketches for buildings he no longer cared to build. He looked at the notebook under the warm glow of the firelight. It represented the man he used to be driven by external validation and artificial urgency. He opened the fireplace grate. He didn't hesitate. He gently placed the notebook onto the glowing embers. The leather curled and smoked, the paper quickly catching fire. The flames consumed the stressed words and the anxious sketches. As the pages turned to ash, the fire released a small, warm puff of air, a final, quiet sigh of release. Elias watched until only fine, gray dust remained, mixing with the other ashes. It wasn't an act of destruction, it was a ceremony of letting go. The past was literally burned, leaving no trace in the cabin's peaceful present. The quiet that followed was different. It was a silence filled with purpose. Elias understood he couldn't stay in the cabin forever. The quiet hour was not a permanent escape, but a deep training. His future was not in returning to the glass towers of Veridia, but in finding a way to bring the essence of the cabin, the stillness, the intentionality, the deep listening back into the world, without becoming consumed by its noise. Perhaps he could help others find their quiet. He had found his stillness in the forest. Now, the quiet was waiting to be carried within him. He blew out the lantern. The fire glowed a dim, steady orange. He crawled beneath the quilt, his heart calm and clear. The last thought before sleep was a sense of immense, peaceful acceptance. For the final chapter of our journey, Elias is standing at the threshold of change, ready to leave the sanctuary of the woods and carry the deepest silence within him. Pay attention to the sound of his footsteps. They are no longer the hurried steps of the city, but the deliberate, mindful pace of a man renewed. Elias woke before dawn on the day he had set for his departure. There was no dread, no hesitation, only a quiet sense of readiness. He had spent his final days preparing, both physically and spiritually, for this moment. He began his final morning ritual. He moved with a meditative slowness. He rekindled the fire one last time, watching the familiar embers catch the dry kindling. He boiled the spring water, the soft hissing hum of the kettle a poignant farewell. He carried his mug of tea to the porch and sat, observing the forest perform its quiet magic. The thin mist rose, the sun slowly painted the tops of the fir trees gold, and the river offered its steady, unchanging murmur. This time, he didn't seek connection. He simply allowed the connection to flow through him. He absorbed the silence, tucking it away in a safe, deep corner of his mind. He knew that the silence of the cabin was temporary, but the stillness he had found was portable. Next came the cleaning of the cabin. Elias approached this task with reverence. He swept the cedar dust from the floorboards, polished the small window pane, and neatly stacked the firewood for the next temporary guest. He wanted to leave the space better than he had found it, a small act of gratitude for the sanctuary it had provided. He packed his few belongings, his comfortable walking boots, the warm quilt he would carry with him, and his new, thin, forest chronicle journal. His phone, which had been off for weeks, remained in his bag, a muted, powerless device. Its return to the grid could wait. Before closing the door, he visited his two greatest teachers. First, the Whispering River. He knelt at the bank and dipped his hand one last time into the frigid, clear water. He felt the rapid current and acknowledged its lesson. Keep flowing. Adapt. Stay clear. Then, he stood before the immense thinking tree. He placed his palm on its rough, red-brown bark. He didn't speak, but he sent a profound wave of thanks for the grounded strength, for the silent wisdom. The tree offered back only stillness. He took a deep breath, locking the heavy wooden door behind him with the ancient, oversized key. The cabin was now quiet, waiting. The walk out of the woods was remarkably different from his hurried, anxious entry weeks ago. Before, he was a man running from an unbearable pressure, his body tense, his gaze frantic. Now, he was a man walking toward a chosen future, his shoulders relaxed, his posture upright, his steps deliberate. He noticed things he had missed before: a small, hidden stream crossing the path, the vibrant scarlet of a patch of berries, the intricate weaving of a giant spiderweb glistening with dew. He moved at the pace of the forest, observing, not reacting. His mind remained clear. The city's noise, which he knew awaited him, was already attempting to infiltrate his thoughts. What will you tell your former colleagues? What about the debts? But he met each worry with the immediate, visceral memory of the river's flow or the star-filled sky. He used the stillness as a shield. He understood the true purpose of the quiet hour. It wasn't isolation. It was the deep immersion required to build an internal sanctuary, a space where, no matter the external storm, he could always retreat to the quiet of the cedar tree. After what felt like a timeless walk, the trees thinned, and he reached the subtle boundary, the narrow, unpaved road that led to the highway and back to civilization. He paused. He placed his backpack on the ground and looked back into the deep, dark, whispering woods. He saw the path he had traveled, the path of healing. Then he turned around and faced the road. He pulled out his little journal and wrote his final entry. Entry final. The hour ends when the stillness begins. I am leaving the quiet, but I am carrying the silence. The world needs this more than I do. He zipped the journal away, picked up his bag, and walked toward the direction of a distant, humming sound, the faint sound of a car on the highway. He made a silent, resolute promise. He would not be defined by the noise of the city, but by the intentional quiet he carried. He would take the lessons of the forest, patience, observation, deep connection, and weave them into his new life. He was no longer Elias, the frantic architect. He was Elias, the curator of stillness. He reached the highway edge, the first wave of traffic noise washing over him. He took a final, deep breath of the pine-scented air, squared his shoulders, and stepped onto the new path. He didn't look back.